Welcome to this fifth lecture, the third week of the machine learning course. The topic for this lecture is genetic algorithms. So, genetic algorithms is a specific and early representative for a class of computational models called evolutionary computing. As for all efforts in evolutionary computing, it's inspired by theories and models from evolutionary biology. So, genetic algorithms are commonly used to generate global solutions to optimization / search problems. Genetic algorithms are particularly useful for problem domains that have a very complex optimality landscape. The simplest form of genetic algorithms is based upon a representation of chromosomes. That's the data items in the form of simple binary strings with discrete functions for evaluating fitness of this chromosome, fitness of the data, and syntactically defined breeding and mutation operators designed specifically for the binary strings. The idea of genetic algorithm could be engineered for much more complex representations than binary strings. That's absolutely possible, but that is not treated in this lecture. So let's look at a moment at the interdisciplinary sources of inspiration for this representation. So genetic algorithms are inspired by Darwinian evolutionary theory and ideas of the survival of the fittest by natural selection. And you can see below some pictures that illustrate the functionalities of this gradual organic development of the natural species. So, in Darwin's theory of evolution, populations changes over time. And he was the first to propose a feasible mechanism for how this happened. So, if we look at the core components now here, so first of all, what is the data set? Yeah, the data set here is called the population. And the data set consists of data items. So in this kind of framework, the data items are called chromosomes, where each chromosome, in a way, data represents one potential solution to the problem at hand. And as I said earlier, what we discuss in this lecture is a very simple model where each data items is a binary string. And so this means that in this terminology used in genetic algorithm, the gene is one position in such a string. So typically, what we also do in genetic algorithm as a very basic operation is to rank each of the chromosomes in a continuous fashion, in a regular fashion. So this means every chromosome, every data item in every step of the process is evaluated by applying a fitness function. Of course, the idea with the whole process is to produce, in the end, the fittest chromosome, one chromosome that has the best performance. So, what is the basic machinery of a genetic algorithm system then? Yeah, the key issues are the following. So we already talked a little about the basic representation. So what happens is that we have this population of chromosome. Then we have a computational cycle where in each step, the fitness of all the whole population is evaluated. And then after that, a selection is made, a subset of the fittest from the population are chosen to directly be included in the next generation. The rest are discarded. Then the selected ones are also allowed to mate. So actually pairs of the remaining ones, the ones who are fittest, are allowed to mate to general children to restore the population site. This mating is typically carried out through a process called crossover, which I will describe a little later. After that, one also allows a step where the new set of data items or chromosomes can be randomly mutated. When that takes place, we have a new generation, and then new cycles follows. So one very important ingredient in the genetic algorithm machinery is the fitness function mentioned earlier. It could also be called an object function or evaluation function. This function looks at every data item and evaluates how close that data item is to a given solution. And because it has such a crucial role, the success of an implementation of genetic algorithm very much depends on this clever choice of the fitness function. It's very important. A few things are important. It's very important that it's clearly defined, so it's understandable. It's important that it generates intuitively reasonable results. It doesn't need to be simple. It can be complex, but it should be easy to understand, and it should create intuitive results. It should also be such that it's efficient to implement, because it will be evaluated many times. So if you can consider you have a large population and you run this very many times, there is a computational issue here involved. And syntactically, it's supposed to produce a quantitative measure, real value, that can discriminate the chromosomes as much as possible. So it was mentioned earlier that in the production of new chromosomes from parent chromosomes, there are a few key operations involved. So for mating between old chromosomes, the crossover operation is used, and then there is also a mutation operation normally applied. So crossover then needs some explanation. So single point crossover is actually essentially taking two strings, two parents, choosing one point in the binary string, and take and essentially swap all the bits to the right of that point. So as you see the examples, the two parents, left part up to the crossover point remains the same, while the right strings are swapped, giving then two children. The alternative is to have a multi-point crossover, which means that in the case of two-point crossover, 2 points are picked randomly, and the section between the 2 points are swapped, while the beginning and the end remains the same. And this can be generalized to key point, but that's not very important. Okay, so this is crossover. Mutation operation is very simple. It means simply to flip a bit at a random position. The binary represented genetic programming scheme is a very simple, straightforward, and appealing. But there are a number of drawbacks with this, and I want to mention a few issues. So it's crucial and non-trivial how the features of problems are mapped to binary strings. Already when we talked about neural networks, we realized that it's not necessarily a simple problem to take a set of features in some form and map them onto the input layer of a neural network. In the genetic algorithm setting, this becomes even more tricky because have you, I hope, understood that these chromosomes are changed and modified in a syntactical manner, which means that the crossover, for example, operations will break the binary string in various parts. And it cannot happen, of course, that that kind of crossover breaks apart bits that, in a way, belongs to the same feature. So the modeling of the feature set onto the chromosome binary strings is a non-trivial task. Also, the choice of fitness function is absolutely crucial. That is also an issue because it's a single component of the system, and its behavior is so important. And as I already touched, depending on how the feature values are modeled onto the chromosomes, one may have to restrict the crossover and mutation operators so they cannot produce non-meaningful chromosomes from a problem point of view, domain point of view. Also, here there are a lot of parameters, hyperparameters, that those exist for any system. I mentioned it for neural networks, but here there are many, and these have to be adjusted typically. And those parameters are such as reproduction, the size of a reproduction subset, the mutation frequency, the various crossover policies, etc. And then also a problem for this, also as for neural networks, that the amount of computation needed are typically immense for this kind of setup. So I have included a more detailed example here, and it's a very simple example, and on this first slide you can see the setup. So you have a number of binary digit constituting the chromosome of the size of 8. We have four data items. We have a function, fitness function, that counts the number of ones. We have a crossover rate, which guides the crossover functionality. We have a mutation rate, and so on. So the hyperparameters are set, and the outline is done. So then, in the next part of the example, the fitness functions are evaluated and normalized, and then the crossover operation is performed, and then the mutation form, which then creates actually a new population. And as is observed here, It's not always that it always goes locally in the right direction. It can be so that some of the fittest candidates disappear, but then reoccur. Actually, one very good property of genetic algorithm that is not sensitive for local optimization, which many other algorithms suffer from. So for your convenience, I included two other examples here. There are new aspects of these of particular importance. It's just that you can see some alternative examples. So the first example is a solution to the 8 queens problem. So as you can understand, one issue here is to code the positions of the on the chessboard of the queens, of the 8 queens, in a form so it can be mapped onto a chromosome. So in the second example, you can see the problem is to maximize a numerical function. So this is just another kind of case. So then the question is how does genetic algorithms relate to learning? And of course there can be many possible connections here, but the one I want to mention at this point is called classifier systems. So essentially a classifier system is production system as it was described in one of the earlier lectures, in the first lecture this week. And essentially what one does in a classifier system is that the production rules of a production system are mapped onto the binary strings of a genetic algorithm. I mean, you already saw some slides ago how you need to do this mapping. So for the 8 queens problem, you have to do it in some way, or you probably do it in another. So of course, nothing prevents that you can take the symbolic rules of a rule-based system or a production system and map them onto the binary strings. So this means, in a way, that you can utilize the functionality of the genetic algorithm so that the set, the population, the data set is exactly a number of data items or chromosomes that are equivalent to an initial rule set that is supposed to solve a certain problem. Okay, so but then of course you need a separate model of this module in the system, so where you in every generation apply this system, the current generation, to a specific problem, and typically that module acts like what was described in on the slides on rule-based systems. So essentially there is some kind of inference engines that tries out which classifiers matches the problem at hand, and of course you also need then in the system some reinforcement feedback so that credit and blame can be given to individual contributing classifiers. And there is actually an algorithm for that called bucket brigade algorithm, which is very similar to what in the neural network case is called back propagation. So the feedback to the individual classifiers from the result of the application of the rule set forms the basis for the fitness evaluation of the population. But for the rest, normal genetic algorithm machinery is run, which means that there will be a new generation of rules every time. The new generation will apply it again to the problem. There will be feedback generated. There will be credit and blame to the individual classifiers, and so on and so on. So this is one approach to combining a learning scenario of a rule-based system to the genetic algorithm setup. So in this slide is just a repetition of what I said a little earlier. So essentially a classifier system is a combination of a generic algorithm running and a kind of rule-based reinforcement-based system. So essentially you have a rule base. The rule base you see in the picture, it constitutes the population of the genetic algorithm. But in every step of the process, this rule base is applied to a certain problem task, and the result of that problem solving is then fed back into the rule system again, so that credit and blame are given to the individual rules, and then the credit and blame distribution over the rules are used as the basis for the fitness function, and then the genetic algorithm creates a new generation, and so on and so on. So this was the end of the 5th lecture this week. So the lecture number 6 will be on the topic of logic programming. Thank you. Goodbye.